Hey guys, my name is Julian, Juju Talk Sports Martinez. I'm the host of the Slump Buster podcast, and I am honored to be part of Frank's show here. Just a little
Thank you.
backstory on us. We started our show back in August of 2019. We have one goal in life. That's to bust the slump. We do the Slump Buster podcast, Slump Buster Fantasy Football, Slump Buster Reacts, and Get Your Popcorn movie series where we review purely sports movies. So that's why we ask on our show all the time, what's your favorite sports movie? And yeah, we have some fun conversations from that. So that's a little backstory on me. And yeah, that's pretty much stuff we do at the Slump Bus for the most part.
Okay, I'm going to throw everything completely out of the water here. I'll give you three of my favorite sports movies that no one else will ever say. Heaven Can Wait with Warren Beatty, because it was just a cool story, and then you had the football part of it. And I liked seeing the Steelers get beat because I'm a Browns fan. So that was pretty cool. Then you look at something like you can't not have Rocky. Unfortunately,
Yeah,
that's
I
just
agree with that one.
that's a tough one that you just can't ignore, even if you don't want to. Whenever Rocky comes on, you're like, I'm not watching, and you hear dun, 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 dun. Okay, I'll watch this stupid thing. And then probably, let's see, I would probably go with Remember the Titans.
See that one, so like I said, we asked all our guests on the show, like, what's your favorite? And like, Remember the Titans, I want to say, so we've asked about like 25 people this. I want to say Remember Titans been dropped by at least 10 people on our show. And actually, I didn't remember it that well because I watched it when I was a kid, right?
Right.
So I actually decided, you know what? Everyone always mentions it on our show. Let me just rent it and rewatch it real quick. And yeah, it's a damn good movie by all means. Like, my personal favorite, I'm a Major League fan because the way I kind of like evaluate movies whenever I'm doing like my all-time list is, can I just throw this on any day of the week, right?
Right.
Like, even if it's on like Comedy Central, and Comedy Central movies suck because they censor everything.
Right.
But
Right.
even then, like, I'll just sit down and I'll watch it for a couple hours just because it's so. I mean, that's Charlie Sheen at his best. Then of course you have Wesley Snipes in there as well as Willie Mays Hayes. Kind of funny whenever you watch Major League 2 and realize that they replaced him with Omar Epps. But
Right. Right.
that's my favorite. So I like the comedy aspect, but Remember Titans, it definitely deserves its place among the best. You mentioned Rocky. We actually ranked the Rocky movies on our last episode that we're about to drop today. The girl that did it for us, like, there was some interesting little debates in there. Like, she said Rocky Balboa was her least favorite. Then she went 5, 3, 4, 2, and 1. I was surprised at that, though, because I thought we were all in unison that Rocky 5 was the worst Rocky movie of all time.
Right.
It shocked me there. If you had to personally rank it, Frank, where would you go on
I
that
think
one?
I go by the villain. I don't go by the Rocky. I go by the villain. Because obviously Apollo Creed is the great villain, even though he's not a villain, but he is a villain, but he's not a villain, and is a villain. So that's the cool one. Then I probably go, I've got a split between, and I guess it's going to be 3 and 4, between Mr. T and Ivan Drago. Because, again, Mr. T, it's a line that we use on the show, prediction for today's show, prediction, pain. That's how you go with that. But then Drago it's like when Hulk Hogan was in 3. It's like, well, how do you beat Hulk Hogan? Well, it's really not real, but it is real. So that's kind of those are the ones. And then when you get into the Creed ones and all those and everything, now it's, to me, I'm an old guy. So now for some odd reason, for the first 3 or 4, you thought it was possible that Rocky just might lose. He wouldn't, but it was possible that, okay, maybe he pulls a shoulder out of whack or something, and then he pulls out of the fight, and then they've got to shoot Drago or something happens. But after a while, you're like, okay, Rambo's going to survive. Indiana Jones is going to find the treasure and whatever's going to happen. It's almost to the point where you go, it's still a great ride, but you've been on the ride if you've been. It's like you go to your favorite amusement park and you've been on that roller coaster 37 times. You still want to go on the 38th one, but it's not like you're going to lose sleep if they shut the ride down.
That's fair. And I think that's what a lot of movies struggle with giving the protagonist the win. on it. I mean, they
Right.
did give him the loss technically in
Right.
Rocky Balboa. Mason
Right.
Dixon got that win there. And then in the first Creed movie, they actually did give the win to the other guy in there. I can't remember that villain as well, but I personally like the Creed movies. You know, like we had
It changed it up, right?
Yeah, you know, like same basic philosophy behind it, you know, and it's kind of like if you look at actual timelines, it's like weird that Apollo Creed has a son and all this, but
yeah,
neither here or there. Michael B. Jordan, he does a great job with it,
right.
you know, actually too. Like since I finally got a chance to go back in the gym, I've been trying out like his like workout routine from the movies, and I tell you, how those Hollywood trainers do that, they just kick your ass, man. Like,
well, we were trying to do in, I think it was 4 when he was in Russia, the inverted sit-up thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, okay, I can't walk for the next 3 weeks. It was like I couldn't even go to the refrigerator for the first couple of days. I'm like, I can't believe he did that. There's just no way. But you mentioned the Mason Dixon one. I actually were trying to get, and I haven't figured out the way to put it together yet.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we might get Antonio Tarver on our boxing show. So that's going to be cool. Just to, there's so many things to talk to him about. But that's one of the things we want to talk to him about. But yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I heard during that movie he legit knocked Stallone out during the filming of it because they do kind of like live sparring for that one.
Yeah, and that's when you realize Stallone's not that big of a guy. You know, he's fighting as a heavyweight, but I don't think Stallone got over 180. You know, it's like, okay, you make it look good because Mr. T's not that big of a guy either. I mean, he's a big guy, but he's not that tall of a guy. So Mr. T's probably about 195 if when he was Mr. T. So you're going, okay. Then that's why Hulk Hogan makes him look like he's so small because Hulk Hogan's 6'6" and Stallone's like 5'7". So like, okay. So I can see that happening. So plus, in his words, he said he wanted to make it as realistic as possible. So a lot of those things were go ahead and hit me and see what happens. So I don't know.
I think Michael B. Jordan also got knocked out during the first Creed filming as well. Like the guy that he faces, like in his dad's gym, I want to say is the same guy that knocked him out in that one. Like, it's kind of funny, like the dedication to the role right there, just to be willing to get knocked out by some of these like just freight train punchers, like some of these guys are. Yeah.
I mean, to make it realistic, you have to actually understand what it feels like to get hit. And especially in the first one, that's what they talked about. It's like, okay, we're in here and we're serious about this. I mean, you can tell a lot of times that the punch is missing by that much, but sometimes you can't tell because the punch actually landed, and depends on how they choreographed it and everything. So, it's pretty cool. But yeah, we do a boxing show every Wednesday, and that's we went back last week and we did the 2009 fight of the year, Juan Manuel Marquez against Juan Diaz. And then we have one of the judges on, Max DeLuca. So we interspersed him in between the show. And it's kind of, you get that feeling of what it's like to actually be there and be inside of the ring and be inside of all that's going on. And you realize that the boxing movies are pretty close, but they don't quite match up to the whole real thing. But they do a good job, especially the Rocky movies.
I would say probably the best thing. So, like, in terms of the fight choreography from the first few, yeah, they're a little ridiculous. Like, Rocky IV in particular, like, was straight up a wrestling match between him and Dolph Lundgren.
Right.
But at the same time, the last few movies, what I really like about them is you look at just the pacing, how they kind of give it that HBO fights kind of vibe,
right.
The respect that it kind of deserves. I like that a lot. I like that they did the entrances like they did because it feels like, I felt like in some ways like I was watching Deontay Wilder versus Tyson Fury, that kind of same energy was in the air, as opposed to like, again, the first movies, they were fine. They were awesome for the time, but they, the cameras, the budget wasn't necessarily there in the same way because I want to say like the first Rocky in particular, like even though it won like Best Picture and everything like that, like, Stallone was, a new up and coming actor and didn't necessarily have the funds to get that movie like the proper budget. And that's why I think, you could tell with the next few Rockies, they're just trying to blow out the budget, like with getting Mr. T, with getting Dolph Lundgren, with doing all these special things like the the dang robot,
Right. We've got a couple of bucks to spend this time. Right, exactly. But, one of the fun things about it is the one that they didn't have the money to spend on, that's when they had to actually hit each other. So,
Mm-hmm.
But it is cool to go back and look at those movies. Like you mentioned Major League. Now, I love Major League, but growing up as a Cleveland Indians fan, that's a tough one to call a favorite movie because you're like, they got there. Well, they weren't going to get there. At that point in time, they weren't going to get there. And then a couple years later, they did, which was really amazing. But at that point, it was like, really? You're going to make a movie? This is how bad my team is. You're going to make a movie about my team, and you're going to make it a fantasy because no one in the world believes they actually can win a series or beat the Yankees or get to the playoffs. No one believes it can happen. That's how bad my team was.
I think that's the director's motivation, though, because sure. I think if I recall the story right, he's actually from Cleveland or was a Cleveland Indians fan himself, right. And wrote the entire script based around the idea of, well, I can't see them win in real life, so I might as well see them win in my movie. And you mentioned it's kind of funny, though. I do like that timeline, though, that the first Major League came out and then the Indians started getting a little bit better, because let's see. So the first one came out early 90s.
95, something like that.
Yeah. And then in 97, they're in the World Series against the Marlins.
Right.
Good old Edgar Renteria, Game 7 there. I have fond memories personally as a Giants fan of Edgar myself, but as I can imagine, that one probably haunts you a little bit, considering.
Well, but here's my explanation for that, and it's pretty simple. Not all Indians fans prescribe to this, but I do. When I was a kid, my team was so bad, that just the concept of them getting to the World Series was unfathomable. And when they got to the World Series, so they lost. I never thought they'd get to a World Series. To me, the triumph was getting to the World Series, to have a team that was good enough to get there. And then when they got there again, that one's a little more disappointing, but still, 2 times in my lifetime, the Indians made the World Series. Now, when they lost to the Cubs, that's a whole different story. They should have won that one, But that was the rain delay from wherever, They had the momentum and the rain came and that cut it out. But up until that, those 2 times they got to the World Series, I'm like, hey, it's not a loss. Now, I don't know a lot of Indians fans that feel that way, but to me it was, I went to Old Municipal Stadium on opening day when there were 80,000 people, and then went next week when there were 15,000 people. And the rest of the season, it was like that. So I had no problem with that. I thought it was pretty cool. And I liked the movie, too.
Well, 2016, that was just, you had essentially a team that was blessed by God in the Cubs that year. It was time. But it was such a unique series, obviously, because the Indians and the Cubs had the 2 longest winless streaks in the entire Major League, which was it was awesome to see. I was talking to a Cubs fan a few weeks ago on our show too, that actually had the opportunity to be in the stands during the Game 7. And I'm telling her, take me through that moment. What's it like when you have the rain delays, you have so much on the line, you have that game tying homer in the 9th, it's Game 7. So no matter what happens here today, someone's walking out with the commissioner's trophy, just that level of intensity. But I kind of relate to you in a way, too, because for similar to me, the Niners over here, they have been really bad in my lifetime. And now I'm in this unique phase where technically I can say they've been to a Super Bowl twice in the last 6 years, 6-7 years. But at the same time, seeing them lose, it's such a bitter, painful pill to swallow that I just it haunts me every day, especially with 2020 being as rough as it's been. I just keep looking at that photo of them in the end zone celebrating that sacking interception on Patrick Mahomes, and it just gives me reoccurring PTSD. Every time I look at it, I'm just I just see picture helicopters just in the background, just.
Well, and you kind of have the same story that I have. We have that. Well, the Browns won the NFL championship back in 19 blah blah blah. And I was that was before I was born. Okay, You can say that it happened, and I agree that it happened. And we had the great Jim Brown and the autograms, and you can say all that fantastic, wonderful stuff, but it didn't happen in my lifetime. And then we have the Brian Sipe years and the Bernie Kosar years, and we were okay. I mean, we got to the cusp, but we didn't get there. So you can say the same thing about the Niners. Well, you had the Joe Montana seasons and the Steve Young seasons, and they did this and they did that and all that. But if you didn't witness it, you're not on that bandwagon. You're on the bandwagon of the team that's there now. You're not the Jerry Rice bandwagon. You're with the bandwagon of the Jimmy Garoppolos. And you got to get there. So, yeah, it's tough. It's tough. I get that.
My dad, he tells me about all these stories, like of the 90s, the 80s. Like so, again, New Mexico, we don't have any pro sports teams like growing up and everything. But, like, he tells me, like, his story behind why he's a Niners fan. Basically, in the 80s, they were the only team that was kicking the Cowboys' ass.
Right.
So, by the time it hit me, I didn't realize what a painful, tiring existence he would bring me into as a Niners fan myself. Because, I saw a lot of bad football, for the early parts there. Right. Because when I first got into it, we had, I think, what was the name, like, Dickerson or something, the head coach directly after Steve Mariucci left.
Right.
And then he was only there for like a year and a half. And then they bring in Mike Nolan. Nolan, and then Singletary. And Singletary was fun. Don't get me wrong. The fact he's dropping trow in the locker room. I still don't understand the context behind that story. But apparently it motivated Vernon Davis to be a better football player. And then when Harbaugh came, it was like such a godsend moment. Like, this guy comes in, we're going to 3 straight NFC championships right off the bat. He's a winner. He's a little bit of an asshole, but he's a winner. And then and then we fire him. Which is just a thing you don't see like in any other sport. It's like a guy who brings you this much success and you fire him? Really? Then we have Chip Kelly, and then we have Jim Tom Sula, who was one of the most regrettable head coaching hires I've seen in sports. Finally, they bring in Kyle, and Kyle is great, but those first 2 years of Kyle, they were rebuilding, Jimmy gets hurt, there's not much you can do. So now we have the team we have now. Talking about that Super Bowl hangover, I don't know which way they're going to go. And yeah, it's a tough one. I do another show actually too called like 49 Reasons to Listen. And on that one, we just talk purely Niners. And we were like talking, should we talk old school Niners? Because do we have the right context for it? And having not lived in that generation. Right. So a lot of our videos so far have been, what's a better defense, 2012 or 2019? How good is Jimmy? Kittle versus Kelsey? A lot of modern day topics that like we can actually talk about in an educated way.
Well, your show, Slump Busters, I mean, that's basically where we're at right now. How do we, the Cubs bust a slump and the Indians don't. The Chiefs bust a slump and the Niners don't. And that's kind of where we're at. I don't mind the dynasty. I like if one of my teams were in the dynasty. That would be great. I don't mind the dynasty, but we moved to North Central Ohio and became Indians fans. But my dad was originally from Southern Ohio, so he was a Reds fan. So trying to reconcile that when we moved and the Reds were still the big red machine and the Indians were the mistake by the lake. To follow this team when your team is still good, and that's kind of – so we would watch Indians games and it would always come up, yeah, but they're not the Reds. No, the Reds are good. We suck, but you just keep moving on and go from there. But like you said, now you've got a Niners team that is, well, let's get into this. Let's start with this as far as we're talking about fantasy and whatnot. Now, we understand that the NBA season, the NHL season, the MLB season are going to be completely out of whack. And until they've put it on paper, until they actually start getting back into what they're going to do, I don't think we have a clue. And I'd like to talk about the fantasy aspect of that in a moment. But the NFL should be straight up. You're going to miss, the off-season training and all those things. You're going to miss some of that stuff, and you're probably going to get a lesser impact from the rookies, which, again, may be a fantasy thing we have to think about. But the teams that are there should pretty much be even more so basically what they were last year, because unless you have free agents. The draft, I don't think you get as much of an impact from drafted players just because it's going to take them, unless they're a stud, to get integrated into the team. So we're looking at, I'm going to assume, obviously we've got some big free agent moves that were made. The Tom Brady one is the biggest one, but also some other ones are going to impact a few things. But I would think that it's not too far-fetched, and I'm in Vegas, so I could go to the sports book and say, where's the line? I'm pretty sure that I would favor anyway, a Super Bowl rematch. Rarely happens, but I would figure that. Because you're looking at teams that have weakened themselves, in the AFC especially. The Texans have weakened themselves, I think. The Patriots have weakened themselves. And the Ravens should be about the same or even more improved. But again, now we've had a chance to see Lamar for a year, and now we have to figure out what we're going to do about that. So I would say the Chiefs are probably where they should be. And on the other end, I don't really see that you've got a problem with the Niners being at that level. But that's just my take on it.
Okay. We addressed the Super Bowl rematch possibilities because even Travis Kelce I expect this to be a Super Bowl rematch. So, I mean, if you look at what the Chiefs done, you have to think the Chiefs got a little bit better with pickups like Clyde Edwards-Helaire. They still have that defense together. They returned all 11 starters on offense. So, yeah, the Chiefs are looking in a great position. The Niners, and this is just unbiased, I mean, they're replacing a Pro Bowler in DeForest Buckner with a rookie. They're replacing another former Pro Bowler in Emmanuel Sanders with a rookie. So there are some changes. There are some things that they're going to have to fix because I know after draft day, us fans, we like to think that all our players are just going to hit. They're just going to slide right into that same position and they're going to be fine. But, those are two big moves that I don't think can be underrated. If I had to put money on it too, I would say I'm leaning rematch as well, just because looking at, like you said, the AFC, the Ravens are a problem, not going to lie, but the Chiefs has kind of had ownage on the Ravens over the last couple of years. Right. And unless Lamar Jackson can take that next step as a starter in terms of his passing ability, I don't see them getting over the hump because we know how good Patrick Mahomes is. We know that Chiefs offense is just going to roll. Unless the Ravens defense could shut them down, then they're going to just always provide problems for the Ravens. In terms of the NFC, the NFC is a tough. It's filled with landmines all over the place. I mean, the Saints, despite their problems this week, they're going to be in trouble. The Buccaneers, we don't know what that's going to be, but you have to expect that they're still going to be a competitive, tough team. The Eagles, I mean, they're fixed their problem at the wide receiver position. I'm not high on the Packers. I think the Packers are going to take a step back. And the Vikings had a very unique draft. You very, very rarely hear about a team have like 15 draft picks in a given year.
Right.
And now they have the situation with Dalvin Cook wanting to hold out. It's funny because I'm at this point with the running back position. I'm sure you're familiar with the SpongeBob meme. How many times do I have to teach you this lesson, old man? But, I mean, running backs holding out, like we haven't seen a great track history for it. I mean, Le'Veon Bell did that, and all he did was lose out on $14 million, $15 million guaranteed. Similar, Melvin Gordon lost a couple paychecks because he decided to hold out the week 6, and Austin Eckler took over that situation. Yeah.
What I see with the running backs, and not to interject here, but just to real quick, that we've seen in the draft that the teams don't value running backs. Because there have been some good backs that have been available. I mean, even Saquon Barkley. Okay, you went high to get him. But pretty much we've gone down the line. I mean, let's see. We've got Barkley, Ezekiel Elliott, and in the last 5-6 years, how many top 10 backs have there been in the draft?
Well, Leonard Fournette was drafted, I think, 3 overall. So that's another one. And I can't really think too much. I mean, was Todd Gurley –
Gurley was a high draft pick as well, yeah.
Yeah. Right. The thing is, when you draft a running back in the top 10, they have to absolutely 100% hit. And they not just hit, they need to pretty much be averaging 5 yards per carry, be the focal point of your offense, and leading the team in not only rushing categories, but the new expectation for a running back in the NFL is to be a dual threat. That's why Christian McCaffrey actually got paid.
Right.
He pretty much does everything.
Because he's not a running back, exactly. Yeah. Right.
Well, so, yeah.
And carry that a step further, like you said, Fournette's had injury problems. Gurley, even though he just declared himself fit this morning or last night or whatever it was, let's be honest, we don't know where he's at. And because we don't know where he's at, that's why he's not with the Rams anymore. And even the Le'Veon Bell, they're so up and down. The teams are like, we can get that production. Again, looking back at your former 49ers and the Bill Walsh era, it's like, we can have running backs. We can run the ball. But we can also move the chains without having to run the ball right up the middle. And now if you go 4 wide, 5 wide, and the 7-on-7 drills and the 7-on-7 camps that they have coming up, they're used to playing without running backs, to tell you the truth. So we get to the point where we just make plays and do what we need to do, and we don't value the running back like we used to. And the running back usually ends up getting dinged up pretty quickly. So even if you have that great season or 2 or 3, rookie through 4, they're not counting on you after that. Whereas you can have an old veteran wide receiver that's 13 years down the road and can still run a 4-5 but run a route, you're good with him. Or we're seeing, again, you mentioned Travis Kelce, we're starting to see those George Kittle, we're starting to see tight ends, they're able to do things and be more versatile as well. So I don't think that, not having those guys, even though I'm an old running back fan at heart, like you said, the league has flipped so much that, oh, well, what are you going to do? You don't have them, you don't have them.
Yeah, I mean, just in general with like what the Niners do with Kyle Shanahan, they had like 4 running backs last year. And each time one of those guys stepped in, they had the games of their life, right. And that kind of just tells you, like, depending on your blocking scheme, depending on the scheme in general, you could pretty much put anyone in like Kyle's system. And I'm sure there's a lot of other teams around the league that can pretty much just say the same. Hell, even you look at Dallas, and Dallas did overpay at running back when they went with Zeke. Even Pollard last year had some decent moments whenever he stepped in for Zeke. So there's just really no incentive to – and pay is relative. Like people say, this guy got paid, versus another. These guys are still getting 9-10 million bare minimum. But still, like, overpay 15-16 million, like, whenever it's a capped sport, it's just so hard to do. You mentioned Kittle and Kelce, that contract negotiation. That's another thing we talked about.
That's going to be fun, right? Yeah.
Because it is so unique. Because if you look at some comps, right? So the top paid left tackle currently is Laremy Tunsil at $22 million. The top paid wide receiver is Julio Jones at $22 million. The top paid tight end is, what's his name? Austin Hooper at $10 million.
Right.
His base salary this year is like $2 million. So when you're George Kittle and you're coming over there asking for a contract, and the deal is like, well, tight ends have historically been paid this for this long. Your agent's just putting out there, we're not looking at tight end deals. Well, that's difficult, and you don't want to punish a guy for being a unicorn, but when you consider, like, well, are we going to pay you like Julio Jones, or are we going to pay you like Laremy Tunsil? Because you do a mix of both of what they do, but you don't do exactly one thing that the other does. Because, I mean, Kittle last year was about 80 catches for close to 1,000 yards. He missed a couple games with injury, and I think this is another argument for the tight end position. They get banged up, or at least if you play the way that George Kittle plays,
you get hit from all sides, right?
Banged up. Yeah, because you look at just like that Saints game, right? So that famous like last play from him where he's taking on like 5 defenders and dragging them 30 yards. You do that for 16 games in a given year, you're going to tear something, you're going to break something. God forbid, I love Kittle, but I think a more realistic range and what the Niners may have to do on that situation. So $20 million is the top guaranteed contract, $22 million. I would say if they could settle somewhere in the 25 to 30 million range would be fine. And as far as a yearly base salary, I would say, I think my walkaway number is 16 million. Like, that's as close as I'm willing to get without like going over, because you just can't meet at 20 million. You
look at the tight ends in let's say the last 10 years, and you can say you factor Gronkowski out of that, okay, because he's, like you said, the unicorn. But you look at the top 3 tight ends each year for the last 10 years. It's usually 2 different people each year. And someone has that breakout season, and then what happens? Cleveland, and I'm going to forget his name right now, Cleveland had a guy that was a stud for a year, and he was out of football 2 years later. And I don't know why I can't remember his name, but, that's kind of the way it works. It's a position where you get beat up from all sides. It's a scheme position as well. If your OC doesn't see that they can play through you, then they won't, and you went from 80 catches to 30 catches. That's a tough thing to do. Well, we need more blocking, we need more protection. Like you said, if my left tackle or my right tackle isn't getting the job done, we need to keep you on the block. Well, that doesn't look good in fantasy. That doesn't look good to the eye test, and it definitely doesn't look good in the pocketbook. So you may have done what the team asked you to do in order to protect your quarterback, who is the guy with the golden wallet, but okay, what did you get accomplished? Well, I had 35 catches, but I blocked a lot. Thanks, we can get anybody to do that. And going back to the running back thing, it's kind of the same thing. By scheme, they figure that as a running back, like McCaffrey, for example, he couldn't have played in this league 20 years ago. I'm not saying he couldn't play, but you know the gist of what I'm trying to say. He couldn't have had the numbers that he's having now 20 years ago because it was a different game. He would have had to go up against big, stud, beefy middle linebackers whose job was to hit him as he ran up the middle. And he would have had two of them and a safety coming up to fill the box as well. Well, now you spread the field, you make things a little bit more wide open, you put him in different situations where he can catch out of the backfield. If he goes up the middle, which he's a good runner up the middle, don't get me wrong, but he usually has a hole. He has to make one guy miss and get down on the ground before the next guy tries to take his head off. But that's 7 yards down the field. So that's a whole different way of playing now. He's being compensated accordingly for what he does. That's great. But I think, and I could be wrong about this, that I think the GMs and the owners and everybody says, we can get, as you said, the Niners, we can get 2 or 3 guys to do this. We don't need to overpay for one guy to run to an open hole, because with the field spread the way it is, there are a lot of open holes. Now, again, it takes a certain somebody to run to an open hole and go to the house. But I think it's more of a, okay, if our wide receivers, our tight ends, and our quarterbacks, and we're getting pass protection, play action pass, there's nobody there to stop him. So we can bring in most anybody to run the ball. And the flip side of that is, what is the tight end going to do in the middle and the end of this contract? Because history has told us not too many of them get there. And the idea of why did Gronk retire? Because he got the crap beat out of him. He may look like a big, strong guy, but you can only take that punishment for so long. And that effectiveness wears down for most of the people. Now, I'm not saying it's going to happen to Kittle, but I can see that being the sticking point of, he may be the unicorn, but we can get a lot of people to play this position and get 60 catches. Maybe not 85, maybe not 90, but 60 or so,
Yeah. I mean, and if you're a head coach like Kyle Shanahan, you have a little bit of an ego with it too.
Sure,
right. Kittle, coming out of college, I think Iowa was one of the least prolific passing teams in the nation. He only had I want to say 30 catches his senior year at Iowa. And then if you're Kyle, you're looking at that and I grabbed that player, I grabbed that prospect and made a George Kittle.
Right.
I can get this guy open. I mean, what George Kittle could do in the open field is where he really makes his money, run after the catch. The fact he's that big but that fast. But if you get people open enough, sometimes someone will just break it. So I personally think there's a huge talent difference between him and the Niners did draft a tight end in the 5th round, Cole McKivitz or something. But I don't know. I haven't seen that guy play. Maybe Kyle can turn him into the next Kittle. But that's where I think if you're the Niners, unfortunately, and fans don't want to hear this, I don't want to hear this, but you do have to set a walkaway number. Right. You can't just continue to play players, pay out the nose, and just hemorrhage your salary cap, because the difference between paying George Kittle $20 million and paying him the $15 to $16 million I'm talking about, that's 4 or 5 role players that you're not going to have on that roster. And if you're a team with the Niners, where you are selling your team on depth, You know, part of why they were so good is because their defensive line was one of the more depth-filled defensive lines in the league. They could just rotate guys in and out. If you take away three or four of those guys, that's a problem. And that's how these teams just fall apart so quickly. It's one of the unique things. The only precedent for like a team that's been able to maintain has been like the Patriots. The Patriots are a unicorn in terms of being a team because despite being in a capital league, despite having not popular draft position in, again, 20 years, when's the last time they drafted in the top 15, right? They managed to piece it together and get by. And they haven't even signed a lot of premium free agents either.
Well, I think their thing is, and again, this may be the coach's ego talking. I'll go back to Kyle's dad, Mike, when he was with the Broncos. It's like, we're going to have a 1,000-yard rusher. Have no idea who it's going to be, but we're going to have a 1,000-yard rusher. And next year, we're going to have a 1,000-yard rusher. Is he on the roster now? I don't know. Don't care. My line does the job. Elway makes them a better running back. I don't really know what we're going to do at the running back position. I don't care, and it's kind of the same mentality that they have in New England. It's a no-star system for a reason. You tell me Julian Edelman, as well as he's played there, can go play in Dallas, can go play in Kansas City, can go play in Minnesota and put up those kind of numbers. No, the system dictates that. The only star that I can think of, and I'm scratching my head for other ones, that's really a star in the offensive end that's come in there was Randy Moss for 1 year. You can say that you had Corey Dillon as a running back, but he was on the tail end of his career, and he wasn't necessarily a star. It's just you've got Brady, who we're going to find out, and I'm not saying he's not a star, but we're going to find out this year whether he is actually a star or it was because of the Patriots. I think it's a combination of both. I'm not going to shortchange either one of them, but we'll find that out this year. But we'll say, okay, Gronkowski, you're a star. Well, you're the tight end, and you're supposed to be a star because that's the way the offense is designed. Edelman, Welker, whatever. Here's your job. Get loose and go 3 yards. Can you do that? Yeah, you're a star now. That's how it's set up. And that can be anybody. That can be, Troy Brown. It can be anyone they put out there because of the way it's set up. Now, again, it's more complicated than that. But they don't have the cap problems. If you decide that you want to get paid, you're going to get paid elsewhere. And we saw that with Brady. Okay, you really think you want to get paid? You really think that you're worth that much money? Okay, we'll replace you with somebody else. It may not work out right away, but we have everything else in place where we can kind of slot it around, move everybody in one spot, and then make it work. And that's the thing you're looking at San Francisco. Okay, you're paying Garoppolo. You're going to pay Kittle. You're going to pay Nick Bosa.
Mm-hmm.
Those are three guys, if you're going to pay them, if you're going to pay Kittle, that are going to be making in an inordinate amount of percentage of the team's salary. You got 42 other guys on the roster. Now, I'm not saying they don't deserve to get paid, don't get me wrong. But see, this is the conundrum with football, that if you're going to pay 3 or 4 guys 40%, 60% of the salary, you can't possibly win. I mean, you can, but it's going to be very tough. And like you said, you can't sustain. It's hard to sustain that when now you've got, well, I can go get money someplace else. Well, I guess I better. I always wonder the guy that leaves the team after they get to the Super Bowl. You just got to the Super Bowl. Why would you leave this team? Because they're not going to pay me what the team over here is going to pay me because I got to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, yep.
It's a little. Well, okay, so we've mined that a little bit. Now let me ask you this question, because again, I think football might be the easiest, but looking at basketball and baseball, what kind of fantasy impact is all of this pandemic and all that going to have? Can you even finish a fantasy baseball or start a fantasy baseball season or finish a fantasy basketball season? What can happen?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that actually, because just like a couple nights ago, I got an alert on my phone, your fantasy baseball draft is starting. The commissioner texted me, he's like, hey, don't worry about that. We still don't know what's going on with our seasons.
Right.
We'll reschedule it. You're right. Football is going to be fine. At this point, even if we've accepted there might not be fans in the stands, fantasy football, all that stuff still expected to kick off as normal. And we'll see the kind of impact that the lack of fan in attendance has on the players. Maybe, I don't know. There's a lot of things. I think the shortened off season definitely hurts those rookies, those new free agents. So that's something you have to monitor. I would say probably the worst thing is just like if you're like one of those fantasy teams that like you want to get a quick start, right? You want to start off with as many wins as possible, build a little equity. I would avoid game players in new situation, new fits, because they're probably going to start the season a little slow. If you could pick them up and hold them on your bench for later in the season, that might not be a bad strategy. Take some flyers on some guys, for later on in the year. As far as fantasy baseball goes, well, like I said, it just all depends on what baseball wants to do here, because I got so frustrated on a couple shows back. I was just like, I get your expletive together, baseball here, because like,
right,
guys, like it's so ridiculous. Now we're talking to the commissioner, or the owners want to throw out there the 75% prorated deal. Here's my thing to MLBPA: take it, just get it done. At this point, the problem is, and I mentioned this when Blake Snell came out with his comments in general. You are making at bare minimum 6 figures, where 40 million Americans are out of work.
Right.
Guys,
right.
If you are making even half of your $30 million contract, you are doing just fine. Yeah. So
you can afford to give a little, right?
Exactly. And the worst part about this, and I'm thinking big picture with it as well, is if you screw the owners this year, do you not think that they're going to remember this 2 years from now when you're talking about that collective bargaining agreement?
Right, exactly.
So 2 out of the next 3 years, we could potentially be looking at no baseball, or at least a lower quality baseball.
Well, and let's look at where we're at right now, okay? We're looking at a lot of weird things here that are unprecedented. You have no season, no all-star break, no anything until we can get back on the field. Now, I would assume, and I'm not right about this, but in my mind, it's like, okay, let's pick the day we're going back to work, whether it be August 1st or August 15th or whatever, and you've already got the parks reserved. You've already got your travel set. Everything should be the same. You've postponed stuff. You haven't canceled it all. So start on August 15th and play the rest of the season, whether it be 72 games or 84 games or whatever, just go from there. That, to me, is the easy thing. Like I said, whether fans in the stands or not, I don't know about that. That's the easy thing. Players get paid for what you play. That's a simple thing, okay? Now, is there revenue we have to worry about there? Sure there is, because we may not have fans, we may not have this, we may not have that. I'm cool with that. I understand it. Negotiate that to a certain extent, but both of you should be able to find a number that works. We're going to lose 25% of our revenue, so you have to take a 25% pay cut. Or we're going to lose 10%. I'll meet you halfway. Good, but we have to have the game, because here's where we're at with baseball. We are at the point where, first of all, baseball isn't the most popular sport as it used to be. I coached a high school basketball team and high school tennis team, whatever, and we went to the batting cage at the local miniature golf place. This was about 10 years ago. And I went, okay, guys, there's a batting cage, let's go. And they wanted to ride the go-karts, they wanted to play all the games, they didn't want to go to the batting cage. Like, why not? And majority of them said, I've never swung a baseball bat before. Huh? What do you mean never? What? What did you do all summer? We played soccer. Really? Wow. And most of them were on the soccer team. Had never swung a baseball bat before. And there are more people like that now than there used to be. When I was a kid, you played baseball in the snow. It just happened. You Hey, there's a snowball. And he threw it, and someone picked up a twig and tried to hit it. That's the way it was. Not as many people playing baseball now. Now we see the draft that's coming up that's going to be a 5-round draft. A 5-round draft that's normally 40-some rounds. Used to be 60-some rounds. A 5-round draft for baseball. What are you going to do? You've already gotten rid of the minor leagues, basically. And I've had a chance to talk to some people in the higher up in the minor leagues, and they're completely flummoxed. I talked to them last year. I'm not going to put words in their mouth, but basically their concept of the whole system was it's our job to put on the event. It's their job to supply, Major League Baseball's job to supply the players. If they don't supply the players, we can't put on the event. Well, that whole minor league system is going to be out of whack now because you're going to draft 5 rounds worth of players. Where are your single-A players? Where are your double-A players? Are you going to put them all in triple-A? How is that going to affect the way things work in the next 4 or 5 years? So you're looking at the whole system being completely changed. It might be changed for the better. I don't know. But the whole system is going to change in the next few years. So you need to make hay right now and keep the baseball fans that you have.
Well, one of the baseball's biggest problems, and I do think this is going to be a sticking point on this next CBA, is the players' ability to hit the open market earlier in their careers. So the big problem I feel is a lot of these stars, they're on their rookie deals or under contract for the first 6 years of their deal when they first break into the majors. It's not even counting any of their minor league experience. And you've seen some teams do some shady things like hold players out for this particular set of time. I know it happened with Chris Bryant, so he wouldn't get a season's eligibility. It just happened with Vladdy Guerrero Jr. as well.
Right. Keeping the minors for a little bit longer than it should have, right?
Exactly. So I think that's going to be one of the big things, and I think it's going to be better for baseball in terms of the conversations. I think what keeps the NBA and the NFL consistently going is the fact that, well, you're constantly talking about who's going somewhere in free agency, the trade markets in the offseason. Baseball has that. You have the winter meetings, you have the trade deadline, but for the most part, good players don't generally leave their teams, or if they do, they sign these 10-year mega deals, and then we don't hear about them for another decade. And by the time we do, they're washed, Right. And if we can have more free agents come out in their primes, the prime of their careers, and more player movement, I think that would be huge for the sport, just in general. It might suck for fans a little bit. Not going to lie. It happened with the NBA. I feel like part of the problem, and I'll say this too from my Celtics fanhood, is I haven't felt confident in buying a jersey over the last few years because I'm like, is this player really going to be on my team in a couple of years? Right. I was tempted by a Kyrie jersey. Clearly that didn't work out. But I think that's going to be a thing with the major league. It's just I don't know what it is, because I feel like players just kind of don't get the concept of from a fan's perspective anymore. I feel like there's a disconnect there nowadays, because you listen to Blake Snell's comments, and they were just really, dude, do you not get that you are making, again, tens of millions of dollars? And then he mentioned the risk.
State, right.
Yeah, he mentioned the risk of COVID, right? The risk of getting caught with COVID. Well, here's was my argument on that. You don't think that MLB is going to have every player tested twice before they play a game, and even if you do catch it, by that margin, if you do catch it, you are going to be provided with the best health care in America.
Right.
It's better health care than a lot of our first responders are having to deal with this mess. Right. So it's what's going on there? I feel like the only player that really gets it anymore is Trevor Bauer. I love Trevor Bauer. I've grown to appreciate him because he'll get out there. I know he did the little baseball game, Sandlot game between some major leaguers, and I think he got some guys from the actual movie Sandlot to participate in it.
Right, he did. Right,
and I think that's really cool. He's done a lot to be an ambassador for the sport that I feel like a lot of players do. And I think another huge thing as well is the faces of baseball, right? The main people that are the superstars, they aren't doing enough to expand the game. Mike Trout, love the guy, love watching the guy. but you don't hear about the guy for the most part. You know, he's an enigma. He's a ghost half the time. And that's supposed to be your main guy. Bryce Harper's like the biggest guy, and even he's pretty quiet most of the year.
The thing about Mike Trout, I being out here, they show the Angels games a lot. And for him, it appears as if it's, I'm going to play the game. For the people in the stands, I'm going to have a great time for them. And he's great with the kids and everybody in the stands. But after the game, that's it. You know, he'll do his autographs. He might be out there for an hour signing autographs, but he's not going to do all the rest of it. And the one thing that I think Major League Baseball has dropped the ball on in the last 25 years, and I think most of the sports have done the same thing, but they made it even worse, is it's Mike Trout and the Angels versus Chris Bryant and the Cubs.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, you hear that often enough that, yeah, I am that important. You know, and even though you're in the clubhouse with guys and you've got all that camaraderie and all that, when it comes time for that contract, when you've been laying it on thick for Javi Baez, he goes, yeah, I don't care whether I got suspended. I don't care. They have to pay me. They can't promote Javi Baez and the Cubs if Javi Baez isn't there. How can they do that? So, and of course, you've got agents chirping their ear saying that kind of stuff as well. But that's part of the problem. So once you get to this point now where the owners are saying, we need to scale back, sorry, it's your fault. And it is. I blame the owners almost across the board, except for, like you said, there are some guys that should have kept their mouth shut and got their paycheck, you know. But the owners have made it to the point where it's like, again, this is where you're talking about, do I want to buy a guy's jersey because I don't know if he's going to be there anymore? Because the owners are, I'm going to wrap it up here real quick, but the owners are the ones that have made it to the point where we have to pay X number of dollars. If I own my own business and I'm a smart person, I may pay my employees 51% of the profits. But I'm not going to make that public knowledge. You know, I'm going to make sure my employees are taken care of. But I'm not going to say, without you guys, I'm not going to be here. I mean, not to be rude about anything, but it's like, I bought the business, I run the business, I pay you, you perform, we'll take care of each other. But the owners have gotten to the point where they're like, just throwing money at one guy without throwing money at everybody. And that's going to make it tough. And that's what you're seeing, like the Blake Snell. You threw this money at me, and I expect me to give it back? No. I understand why he should, but I also understand where he's coming from as well. And unfortunately, now you're not going to have anyone in the stands. You might not have anyone in the stands. Who knows what your TV contract is going to be like? And all these other factors, that's an ownership problem. That's not taking care of your own business. That's making sure, that's letting the CBA take care of your business instead of you taking care of your business.
Yeah, I mean, baseball definitely just has a lot of issues that it needs to figure out because I know, again, like I'm a huge baseball fan. I'm probably like, so I have like our 5-person team on the Slump Buster. I feel like I'm the only one that actually like talks baseball for the most part, right? But, you know, it's just depressing to see like the sport just kind of just like keep stepping into walls, you know, and like, again, right. Like the fact that we could potentially have 2 years and then 2 of the next 3 years where we have either shortened baseball seasons, lesser quality baseball seasons, or maybe even not a baseball season.
Right.
You know, that scares me because the long-term ramifications of that could like send shockwaves for the sport for years to come. I mean, people talk about the 94 strike and mention how the ratings were down consistently up until Sosa and McGuire saved it with the home run chase in the early or the late 90s. And, you know, funny, might as well throw this out there. Watch ESPN 30 for 30 this week. Sosa, McGuire, I think it's was Long Gone Summer, which I'm excited for. Mm-hmm. But you know, like you don't have those guys stepping through the door. I know that we had the whole juice balls and everything, and there's more home runs now than there's ever been. But, you know, no one's really setting any records still, even with that said.
Well, it's the conundrum of we're overpaying for the stars, but we don't have any stars.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not when I'm looking at my calendar for what I'm going to watch for baseball, I'm not going, woohoo, Bryce Harper. You know, I'm not. That's not my game. You know, there may be a couple of pitchers that I want to see throw, but I'm not going, hey, they're playing against, and I get to see a lot of Angels games. I'm like, by watching Mike Trout on a regular basis, you realize how good he is. But you're still not overwhelmed by how good he is. You know, I don't know that there's that player in the league anymore where, like you said, with the Sosa and McGuire, where you had to go, whatever I'm doing, stop and watch this game. The Cubs or Cardinals were playing, especially when they're playing each other at that point, you stopped, or Barry Bonds when he was with the Giants. Love him or hate him, you watched every at-bat you possibly could.
Loved him, personally, myself.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you watched every at-bat that you possibly could. And I won't get into the whole steroid thing, or that's another story entirely. But
come on,
that's another show. My phone's ringing for another
Fair
show.
enough.
So, but we'll go back on it. I tell you what, have me on your show. We'll talk about that. How's that?
Okay, that sounds like a plan. I mean,
okay,
we got some open spaces here I'll find here in the next couple of weeks. But yeah, no, I mean, thank you, Frank. I appreciate you you letting me on here. You know, as far as like the Slump Buster goes, like at Slump Buster Pod on podcast on IG, at Slump Buster Pod on Twitter. We're on all major streaming platforms, of course, as well. And yeah, even check out the website, theslumpbuster.com. We got a lot of cool stuff going on over there.
All right. Thanks again, and enjoy your day. Thank you, sir.
Peace out. Take care.